let's take a call from David. David, you have an '08 Nissan. Is it an automatic or standard transmission? And welcome to Bobby Likis Car Clinic.
Well, thank you, Bobby, and it is an automatic.
Okay.
And my question has to do with saving gas when driving, and I do a lot of highway driving, when coming up on an anticipated stop and I decelerate, I put the transmission into neutral.
Okay.
What are the advantages and disadvantages to that driving technique?
You could not have asked a better person a better question, because I, too, practice with my standard and with my automatic transmissions that exact same procedure.
Well.
And just know this. If you're driving your car or I'm driving, if we're driving the same car, let's say if everything were equal, and we're going 60 miles per hour and we're going to get off on the on-ramp, 4 blocks up the road. So it's time to back off. If I back off the throttle all the way and leave my car in gear, my engine is still going to be running about 2,000 RPM with my gas pedal at rest. And you will kick your car in neutral with your gas pedal at rest, but it will be in neutral. So your engine will not be turning 2,000 RPM. It will be idling. So you would say then that you would not use fuel for that next 2.5 to 3 blocks. Therefore, you would get better MPG than I. You with me?
I'm with you all the way, Bobby.
Okay, except what you don't know is there's a fuel cut. And if you push the clutch in or put the car in neutral and let it idle, it's using enough fuel to idle. When I'm turning more than 1,500 to 1,600 RPM with my foot off the accelerator and the pedal at rest, the computer shuts off all fuel. It's called a fuel cut. And only does it turn the fuel back on when I'm slow enough to go below 1,500 RPM. And if I got down to 1,600 RPM and then pull the lever back into second gear to speed the engine up, and still with my foot at rest, I push the engine with the rear wheels back up beyond 1,500 to 1,600. And I'm still not using any fuel because the injectors are shut off by the fuel cut. And that was designed, number one, in the 80s so that the Jaguar Group 44 specifically could outrun the Porsches at Sebring, because the Porsches were so much faster, and the Jaguar went to Bosch and said, do something. Well, you can't get any more horsepower and the car can't run any faster. The Porsche just is a faster, better track car than yours. So what they did was they devised a fuel cut so that whenever you let off the throttle and you're driving the engine with the rear wheels, then you don't need the fuel, so they shut the fuel off. And so whenever the Porsches outran the Jags, the Porsches had to stop for fuel, and Jags did not. And if you timed it right, if we're a half a lap to go and you got to stop and buy gas or put a splash in the tank, and I don't. And now, as you can see later on, NASCAR, that's a big deal on NASCAR. So that's where it started. How and why it migrated to street cars like yours, and like all cars have the fuel cut now, is emissions. When you let off the fuel and you're coasting, old carbureted cars used to suck a lot of fuel down, and that fuel wouldn't be burned. It would be too fat, too rich, and go out the tailpipe. And likewise, your car is burning fuel unnecessarily. As long as the throttle is at rest, there is a fuel cut micro switch in that throttle position switch. Do you understand?
Well, mostly. Bottom line is my technique of driving a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I like to put my car in gear so that I have control over emergency situations should they arise that for some reason. It's analogous to flying and landing a plane and putting the landing gear down and making the decision and touching down, and all of a sudden something happens and you've got to nail the throttle and take back off again. And that did happen to me in a foggy situation here in my hometown. So I would always opt to leave a car in gear. And that leads me to one more point, and then we have to move on. Never put the car in neutral at a traffic light, because if you see that someone's coming and about to crash into the back of you and you step on the gas, I got to put it in gear. There's a safety device that if you have the car turning beyond a couple of thousand RPM and you put it in gear, it won't go in gear because it would slam and break something. So you got to let off the gas and the engine has to come back to neutral. And by that time, you got people either crashing in to the back of you or blowing the horn. So if you had a standard transmission, it's easier to feel what I'm specifically talking about with regard to the engine coming back online, or I have a digital readout that tells me when the O2 sensors, and so I can see when the fuel cut kicks in because the LED readout for the O2 sensor goes full lean because there's no fuel. Anyway, it's not a bad practice, but I would say not to do it unless you had a standard transmission.
Right. It's not going to save me that much gas.
Absolutely not. Thanks for your call.
Thank you, Bobby.
My pleasure, sir.